Welcome to Straight from the CPA's Mouth, your connection to the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center, Alberta CPAs, and business professionals. This podcast, presented by the CPA Education Foundation, features Alberta Chartered Professional Accountants and others sharing their expertise and insights on a wide range of topics. Tune in regularly for eye-opening looks on leadership, business, education, and many issues of the day, straight from the CPA's mouth. Before we begin, in honor of the 94 calls to action put forth by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, we'd like to acknowledge that CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous peoples and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated.
Welcome back to another episode of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. My name is Jessica DeGroot with the CPA Education Foundation, and I will be your host for this episode. In 2019, Alberta was home to over 160,000 small businesses. I think it's safe to say that if you aren't a small business owner yourself, you know somebody who is. But did you know that 50% of small businesses fail after 5 years? There are several factors that can contribute to a business failing: lack of cash flow, low demand, or unforeseen circumstances such as a global pandemic. Today, we have Josh Spurrell, CPA CA, author of 100 Myths of Entrepreneurship versus Chainsaw, and founder of Spurrell & Associates Chartered Professional Accountants with us to tell us more about the most common mistakes that small business owners make and what they can do to maximize their chances of business success. It's time to hear it straight from the CPA's mouth. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Jessica. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I guess we'll just get right into the conversation. I want to start off by chatting a little bit about your book. So it's titled 100 Myths of Entrepreneurship versus Chainsaw. What inspired you to become an author?
Well, I started in public practice in 2008, and I had kind of the interesting perspective where I started in public practice after I'd run a business. And you start to realize that what you think what people teach about business isn't necessarily the case. I liken it to being like a firefighter where, most people are taught to run out of the burning building, and the firefighter has to be taught to run back into the burning building. So most things that works in small businesses might seem a little bit counterintuitive at times. And we realize that we start having the same conversations over and over again. And so, what we really did is we actually just sat down with the team, and we actually, got them to all list out what their top, conversations that they were having over and over again with clients. And, just like CPAs, we did it empirically. We had just put it on the board, and what were the top 100 that came up over and over again. And we went through with our, couple dozen team members, and those were the 100 that ended up in the book.
That's a lot of questions that an entrepreneur might have, right? And if they're common amongst all of them, then clearly it's something that they're all struggling with. I do have to ask, what is the meaning behind the word chainsaw? The
chainsaw, it's a little bit aggressive because, sometimes we want to, tiptoe around the issue, right? And earlier in my career, maybe I thought like that was the right thing to do, but then I realized like the velocity when things start to go wrong is bad. We talk about, the failure rate, 50% in 5 years, but it's actually like 15% in year one, right? And 30% in year two, and 50% by year 5, and 96% by year 10.
Wow.
It accelerates really quickly, right? And so, having those difficult conversations, it's just like, it's not like, do you think it's okay? It's like, we got to cause a little friction right now, or that person might not even make it to their first year-end meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's you can kind of chug along to a certain point, and then year after year, you can only do it so long if things are starting to go sideways. So of the 100 myths, what would you say is the most common mistake that you see small business owners make?
Well, they all boil down to 3 common mistakes, right? You touched on some of them in your intro. And so it's really comes down to customers, cash flow, and team, right? And so, we tend to, focus on a lot of other things that could happen. You could get some sort of crazy illness or hit by a bus or something like that. But those issues are kind of like statistical white noise, right? And it really just comes down to customers, cash flow, and team. And so when you study these businesses that are actually going to fail, 42% of them, 96% of them are going to fail within 10 years, right? And 42% of them that fail because they can't find enough customers. 29% are going to run out of cash, and 23% can't find the right team, right? And so they all really boil down to those 3 issues. There's different subsets in each of those 3, but those are the 3 primary issues. And if you figure out how to solve those 3 primary issues, really, you reduce the risk of running a small business, where it actually becomes less risky than a government unionized pension job, right? Because you can always get laid off from one job, right? But you're not going to get fired from 1,000 customers at once, right? And so if you figure out how to solve those 3 primary issues in business, you dramatically reduce the risk. And it's like a casino. I tell people, it's like, we don't want to play the casino game. We want to turn our business owners into the card counter at the blackjack table. We're just playing the same boring hand over and over again because we know that it wins.
Right. So, kind of don't mess with what works type thing.
That's right.
Okay. So being that you are obviously a CPA, so of the 3, it was cash flow,
customers, cash flow, and team.
Okay. So I'm assuming that you help people mostly with cash flow.
No, we do all 3.
You do all 3?
We
Awesome.
do all 3, right? Because, in reality, you can see like the customers and cash flow, they're very intrinsically tied, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know how to generate customers. And so if we're just simply going to tell them to adjust their pricing, if they don't know where to find the customers, then, they're just kind of a slave to that customer who just wants to, pay the lowest common denominator, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at, the science of actually generating customers, like most people think that advertising, it's a art form. And really, there's very specific math and metrics of what's going to work. You can catch lightning on a bottle and lightning in a bottle and go viral on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. But that's not statistically likely to happen, right? It's like, akin to winning the lottery, right? Mm-hmm. But there's very proven methods for business owners to acquire customers, right? And so, we write that down. I like it. Most marketers, they're artists. They're not scientists, right? And so, when we write business plans for business owners, I tell people it's like our business plan is like getting a set of drawings before building your house, right? Without a business plan like that, hiring marketers, it's a lot like hiring sub-trades, asking them to come build your house, but not having a set of blueprints. It's very unlikely to go correctly. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting too, because as someone who has a small business of my own, I've, in interacting with other entrepreneurs as well, a lot of people are kind of looking for that, that one magical thing that's going to just completely transform their business and make it successful. And social media has really brought a different game to that, mm-hmm. I guess, side of the coin. And they're always looking to go viral, or, they want, X amount of views on their YouTube video or their Instagram reel. But that's not necessarily going to make your business a success, right? When you're looking at, you could have 1,000 followers on Instagram and all of them could be your ideal client or people that are going to purchase from you. Or you could have 1 million followers and none of them will purchase from you, right?
Correct. Yeah. I tell people it's like they're scared of making a YouTube video and getting 3 views on it, right? But, small business owners, they'll go and attend a networking event and they'll drive a couple hours across town to maybe have one conversation with one person, right? Mm-hmm. Who might be a potential buyer. But, you do a YouTube video and you might get 3 views, but that thing's going to get 3 views every single year forever. It's the same as having, your hologram attend that networking event every single year in perpetuity mathematically, right? It's just a message in a bottle. You throw it out there and they just build and they snowball upon each other. So
yeah, it's like the definition of working smarter and not harder, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so in terms of like what small businesses can do for cash flow, being that you are an accountant, I know everybody always wants to know about, tax write-offs and things like that. So what are some things that small business owners can take advantage of in terms of those types of things?
Well, I'm a little bit of a contrarian, right? And if you consume my content, you'll probably understand that is most people, they're just trying to extract blood from a stone, and they're all sitting around the table talking about the same deductions, right? If you know structurally how a small business corporation works, in Alberta, we can pay 11% tax, which is very good, even for all the crazy tax we pay in Canada, even on a global scale, 11% is pretty darn good, right? But structurally, in order to really build wealth, we have to have a base understanding of how the monetary system works. And it took me a while to actually realize it's that, it might sound a little bit cynical, but really as CPAs, we're effectively experts in counting fake money. The money that we have, the government can just print it and keep printing it and keep printing it, and it keeps debasing. And it doesn't really matter what you do. You're a CPA, you're a restaurant owner, you're a dentist, you lay floors, you're a lawyer. And the value of what we do every single day goes down in relation to the assets that we want to buy, right? And so business owners, they're all stuck around looking for one extra deduction. Can I write off one more meal? It's like, forget that. We got to flip the switch on that. And we got to figure out how true wealth is built, because the Income Tax Act is really nothing more than a smokescreen for how actual wealth is really accumulated, right? People think that, inflation causes prices to rise. It's like, it causes prices to rise, but they don't rise evenly, right? Because if, the money supply goes up, price of gas and energy goes up, right? But rich people aren't going to get more money and suddenly buy 10 steaks for dinner. That's not how it works, right? And so when rich people get more money, they would love to own 10 houses. So there's a disproportionate amount of that new money that's going to flow into desirable asset classes. And we're talking about, gold, we're talking about stocks, we're talking about real estate. And so people need to stop thinking about what's that one extra meal that I can write off, and start thinking about what are the things that you can do where you pay 0% tax, right? And effectively, when you buy and hold quality assets, as those assets go up in value, you don't pay any tax on them unless you sell. So the entire game is about trading your time or your widget for this fake money, and essentially exchanging it for desirable assets that go up in value. We can borrow against them, and there's no tax whatsoever on them.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Don't focus so much on writing off your next lunch, I guess.
Yeah, it's not that you don't write these things off, right? But there's a law of diminishing returns on focusing that, and most people are just not even seeing it, right? Like, they don't really understand. Let's take two people who own restaurants, and one guy owns the best restaurant in town. It's great. It gets lots of reviews. He's featured on, when you travel on Air Canada, they say the best restaurants in Canada, right? And then you can read about it when you're on the plane. And another guy, he has a good restaurant. It's not great, but it's good. But he just opens multiple locations. And instead of renting those locations, he buys the locations that he's there, right? And so you have one guy who has the best restaurant in town, and another guy who has 10 restaurants, and he owns all the real estate which those restaurants operate out of. I think we really know, when we run that scenario through our heads, even just intrinsically, who ends up with more money, who has the bigger net wealth at the end of the day. It's the guy who owns the 10 good restaurants that owns all the real estate that the restaurants operate in. It's not the guy who owns the one restaurant that's the best in town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. And in terms of where we're at now, being that we're hopefully on the other side of the pandemic, do you notice anything or hear business owners, talking about certain things in specific, or are there any kind of new concerns coming out of the COVID pandemic? Yeah,
well, it's still always customers, cash flow, and team. But the biggest one I think that's come out of the pandemic is we see major pricing issues, right? Mm-hmm. Because businesses, historically, they're usually chasing their pricing a little bit, right? They might be, call it 5% behind on their pricing, right? And we're trying to, it's time for a pricing increase here, right? But what happened with, the inflation being, run up so high, right? And people, tend to think that the CPI number is the real inflation, but the CPI number is really just it's a government manipulated number where it's a basket of goods and services. But the problem is that basket doesn't stay the same every single year, right? One year they have ground beef in the they have prime rib in the basket, and the next year they swap it out for ground beef and try to tell you the basket's the same cost. That's not how it works. But when you look at the actual rate of inflation, like now everybody feels how high it is. It's been high for really for 50 years, since 1971, really, where inflation kind of is the inflection point of the whole thing. But at this point, because inflation ran up so high so quickly, most business owners, it's almost like they went into a coma for 10 years and they woke up and they don't understand the pricing in their own industry, right? We used to get, for our construction clients, they would get annual price lists from suppliers. It's like, never mind, we can't even get monthly price lists. We don't even know what the price is tomorrow on it, right? And so business owners who've been operating in their business for years, literally are completely disconnected from the pricing in their own industry right now.
Do you think it's because they can't understand how they can increase their prices so much? Or do you think they worry that, if they increase at the rate of everything else increasing, that they're going to lose out on those customers and then therefore that cash flow? Do you think they worry that people will stop purchasing from them? Yeah,
they're tied, right? And so usually, people in industries, they're tied to like very industry specific metrics. They're tied to like if they're a flooring guy, they're tied to a per square foot price, and they feel comfortable with that per square foot price, right? But in reality, they don't understand that they have to calculate their labor, the burden on that labor, their new supply costs, which changes every single day now, right? They can't go off of any historical square foot price. And then they have to understand how to calculate an actual reasonable margin on that, right? And if they don't know how to acquire new customers, they become a slave to those same customers, right? And really, the businesses that don't know how to acquire new customers, usually the only customers they have are customers that are seeking them out specifically because they think they can exploit them, right? There's a certain type of customer that the ones that they find you, if you're not doing any advertising, they look specifically for you because they think that you don't know how to find customers and they think that they can tell you to work for free.
Yeah. Those are the worst types of customers. Yeah. It's like, I'm in this to make money, not to lose it.
100%, yeah.
Okay, so getting back to like coming out of the pandemic, for the businesses that were kind of hit hard, maybe they were struggling, even before COVID and they managed to make it through, or they've had to pivot. How can they get back on track with things now that we've kind of are hopefully settled into our new normal?
Well, I mean, they have to readjust their pricing. So they really have to understand what's their actual labor cost. They need to understand how to get up-to-date supply costs, and they need a mechanism that they can change that pricing on the fly. Okay, so like gone are the days where we can set the pricing for the year and hope that works out, right? We see it's not just the prices going up; it's just wild fluctuations in those pricing. So they need to get a handle on that now, right? And so if they're doing estimates, quotes, setting even if it's a bricks and mortar business, right? They need to have a mechanism that they can do more dynamic pricing, right? Because if they don't, they're going to figure out at year end and it might be too late.
I know one thing that I worry about specifically, not even like with my business, just in life in general, is that it seems that once things go up, they never go back down. Do you think that's, I know that's something other people worry about, but do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, generally that's the case. It's not coming back down. I mean, you saw a little bit of like reprieve in like lumber prices recently, but for the most part, the government's not really going to contract the money supply a meaningful amount, right? If you just, for the average business owner that doesn't really understand the monetary system, just Google M2 money supply, right? And do a chart and extend that chart out for the maximum, 25, 50 years, right? And you just look at this exponential curve in the money supply going up, and you look at what they call quantitative tightening happening right now, and it's a little tiny bump down, right? It's not, we're not going to get any sort of significant deflation, over the long term, right? Even if something happened and they overcorrected, you got a little bit of deflation, they're immediately going to fire up the money printers again, and it's like prices are going to continue to go up. And that rate's accelerating. Like at a very significant rate, right? So, we're living through people, they don't really understand we're living through a long-term cycle, right? And, we essentially went down this path starting in 1971 when the U.S. got off the gold standard. And, we have these fiat floating currencies, and the rate of, the increase of the money supply is increasing, right? And so there's really no expectation that that's going to slow down. It'll probably just speed up. Ray Dalio does a very good job of explaining it. If you wanted to watch something from him where he talks about the long-term cycles, and this is not new. It happens roughly every 100 years where there's a shift in currencies, and it's one thing where our parents actually didn't live through that. But we probably will statistically, right? Because the world's reserve currencies tend to last, about 105 years, give or take, right? And so there's very little indication that, the U.S. dollar is going to be the world's reserve currency, by the time we retire, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much uncertainty. I think that's hard also to wrap our heads around, what could be the possibility of the future. I do want to shift the conversation a little bit back to marketing, because I know that's big with getting customers and then in turn increasing your cash flow. Mm-hmm. And in our initial conversation before the podcast, you had kind of mentioned that you set aside time in your week to create marketing content. And in many of your videos, you also speak about how many small business owners underestimate the importance of marketing, or they simply just don't spend enough time on it. So I have a couple questions in regards to that. But the first one is, why do you think it is? Why do you think people don't spend enough time on marketing?
There seems to be this one myth, and we talk about it in the book, that the best businesses don't market. Right. Oh. It's funny. Go to a trade fair, in Alberta, you go to the Edmonton Home and Garden Show or something, right? And you'll literally see a banner saying, a business built on word of mouth referrals. But it's sitting there at their booth that cost them $5,000, and they got trucks outside. All of them are auto wrapped for $3,000, and it's so hypocritical. It's comical, right? Where the biggest and best companies in the world are the biggest and best because they spend the most on marketing. When you look at the ratios of the biggest companies, they're spending a higher proportion of their revenue on marketing, right? And then you get some of these contrarians. Sometimes you look at look at Tesla. They don't spend any money on marketing. It's Elon's just playing the game at a different level. I mean, the guy just went out and bought Twitter. Yeah. For how many billions of dollars, right? He'll just go and get a fine from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's he's not an idiot, right? That's just his marketing, the way he's spending it, right? Mm-hmm. The regular people like us, maybe we have to do some videos and buy some Google ads, right? But the fact that if you think you're not going to market and build your business, it's like trying to win a boxing match with one hand tied behind your back.
Mm-hmm. So I know for you specifically, you do spend a lot of time creating content, for your YouTube channel and on social media as well.
Yeah.
Is that where you would kind of recommend somebody start if they were kind of unfamiliar when it comes to marketing?
I think the best place that you can actually start would be long-form video. Because long-form video content is like the Swiss Army knife in marketing, right? And you could just think about just at a really low level, you're just answering questions that you field in your business anyways, right? Just think about the questions that customers of your business ask you, and just start there, right? 10 to 15 minute videos. And like I said before, it's if that video gets 3 views, it's if it gets 3 views from your ideal and likely buyer, that's better than 10,000 views of people. You could, if you want to get a bunch of views, make videos on slime or blowing stuff up or something like that, right? But it's that's not your ideal and likely buyer, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you start out with that long form video, you can do so much with that long form video. You can essentially, you can take that long form video and they can become blog articles on your website. You can clip them up and you can make shorter posts on your social media. A lot of people are starting in the wrong direction. They're starting on Instagram and they're trying to make a small short clip, right, on Instagram or TikTok. And you look at the people who are the most successful in the world at this. They all start with what's called, Gary Vaynerchuk calls it the pillar content strategy, right? Mm-hmm. And they start with a long form video, and every other piece of content branches off from that. If you have good long form video, you can pay someone else to repurpose that long form content, but you can't pay someone to make a short video longer.
True.
You're the subject matter expert. So
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to kind of repurposing that content and working smarter, not harder. So I know that you also, like, as you mentioned, kind of block out that time. So how would you suggest that somebody blocks their time out during the week? Like, do you have categories that you kind of focus on when you do that, like marketing, content creation, things like that?
Yeah, great question. So you got a couple of like time blocking is I just believe what gets scheduled gets done, right? And people think that I'll do it someday, I'll do it on a Saturday. It's like no. If it's not on your calendar, you're not going to do it, right? And if you look at successful entrepreneurs, like they know what they're doing in advance, right? They can tell you when exactly they're doing their content, and your content, your calendar is essentially you're going to have time for the administration of your business. You're going to have time for the marketing of your business. You're going to have time for sales, and you're going to have time for the actual like delivery of product or service, and then you're going to have time for human resources. And those are the categories that you're going to have in your calendar. And if you don't have those categories in your calendar, like you're actually not going to finish, right? And people don't realize like how significant that time for marketing should be in your calendar, right? Because if not, you end up just dealing with the same difficult customers over and over again. And we can tell you what the price should be, but if the phone's not ringing, I tell people, it's like, well, if more than 50% of your prospective buyers are saying yes, it's not because you're that great. It's likely because your prices are too low, and you're just buying the work, right? And they're not profitable. And that's normally what the numbers will say on the back end. So, having that time blocked out for marketing, where you want to be the company where you only have a certain set demand, and you're not actually trying to increase your productivity, your output based on the demand. It's like you want to set, how much can you reasonably produce in a reasonable high quality, and you want to sell it out. That's what you want to do, right? And so your marketing should be generating enough leads that in your slow time, you're still sold out, right? It's like the mortgage broker, right? And they want to turn leads on, they want to start doing some marketing, or a real estate agent, they want to start doing some marketing in the winter. And nobody wants to move. I'm like, and they're worried, like, well, in the summer, too many calls are going to happen. That's how marketing works, actually. Like effective marketing, it's not linear. It won't follow your capacity, right? There's going to be times where you're more than sold out. But if you're not still marketing in those times, what's going to happen in the slow times, you're going to overcorrect in the other direction. And usually the single biggest cost that any business has is, that lost revenue in the slow months for lack of demand, right? It's usually way bigger than any other cost item they actually have in their business. It's just that lost revenue.
Yeah. And what would you say? So I know that this is probably a common excuse. I don't have time to create a YouTube video, or I don't have time to record that, or I don't know how to edit it. What would you say to somebody who's pulling out all those excuses?
These are the excuses that we're taught, right? We're brought up with like this employee mindset, and we're suddenly going to work 40 hours a week. But, there's actual, mathematical stats on people from Harvard University following around successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. And in general, they're going to work 60 plus hours and work 6 days a week. And that's how it works, right? And, people love to say, work smarter but harder. It's like, yeah, but you got to do both, because in your industry, in every industry, there's always someone who's working smarter and harder, right? And so one of the things I did is it's kind of, it might be a little bit funny, but like we have a truck for the business, and it's a big, giant, ridiculous Ford Raptor, right? And a lot of the construction guys are like, I'd love to get a Ford Raptor. I was like, don't look at the Ford Raptor, look what's on the hood of my Raptor. And on the hood we have it, and it says 5 a.m. right on the hood of the Raptor. And most people don't want to hear that. It's the uncomfortable truth, right? They think that they're just going to work smarter, and that's what's going to happen. But, there's always someone who's just as smart as you, as not smarter, and they're also working hard too, right? And so it really just comes down to there's work-life trade-offs. And if you got into business because you think you're going to have work-life balance, that was the wrong reason to get into business, right? And a lot of people do that too. It's like their boss, wouldn't give them an extra day off or vacation or something like that, and then they decided they're going to start their own business. It's like you got 2 full-time jobs now. You're running this business, and you're also working on the business too. So that's what it's going to be. It's like, you're going to work 60 to 80 hours a week. You get to choose when they are, but you better be specific on the calendar about them and get them scheduled and get them done.
Yeah, I see a lot about that too. And, people wanted more time for themselves, more flexibility. So then they, started a business and now they work 24/7.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So just to kind of wrap things up here, what advice would you give to somebody who has a business idea and they really want to move forward with it, but they just don't know where to start?
Yeah. Get your absolute minimal viable product that's going to, what's the least amount of money that you can get together to actually sell something, right? You think about the restaurant owner and they want to open a steakhouse and it's $1 million bill. It's like, okay, just try to cater 10 events from your kitchen first, right? Sell 10 things to 10 real customers that's somewhat related to what you eventually want to do. Because if you can't start there, you might not ever finish. And a lot of people, they're already, I see them, they're reaching out for a consult, worried about their succession plan and passing the business that has never sold anything down to their grandkids at this point, right? It's like, just sell 10 things to 10 real people that's somewhat related to it. Start there. That's the first place to start, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good start. And I mean, that'll be really telling in terms of how overwhelmed you are with just doing that and whether or not you want to continue on with the next step.
You got it. You're going to love it or you're going to hate that experience. And if you hate that experience, it's like, maybe that's not the right place. Running a business, it's not right for everyone, right? And it doesn't make, some people better than others. It's just, if the business doesn't add to your life, right? We talked about that schedule. It's like, usually when you start in a business, it's like a lot of people, they want to start a business based on, they heard this industry is going to boom. It's like, man, you're going to work in this thing for years, right? And most of the value on a business, it's like usually coming on after 10 years in this thing, right? And so there's going to be a long period of time where you're probably going to make less than an employee in that industry would make, right? You're going to, especially on a per hour basis, right? So people have to understand, it's like, do they actually love doing it? It tends to be like your first business. Your second, third business, you can maybe think a little more strategic, but your first business is like, if it's not something that you might not consider doing for free, at least in your spare time a little bit, it's like, you might want to give some pause there because it gets really difficult.
Yeah. Do you ever, I'm a big believer in that too, that you should really love whatever you decide to start a business in. Do you ever see people succeed doing things that they really hate?
Usually it's not their first business.
Okay.
So usually it's not their first business, right? One of my mentors, he has a, he built one of the largest DJ businesses in the U.S. And he loved being a DJ. It was his thing, right? But then eventually he built a dog training business after that. And he asked me, he's like, he hates dogs. He doesn't like dogs, doesn't own a dog, right? Never wants to own a dog, right? But he also built a series of hair salons too. And you realize in the hair salons that, these are these high end, like kind of like Tommy Gun type, men's hair salons type thing, that it was really hard to do the search engine optimization. You were competing with the Cut Sixes of the world, right? But then you looked at the local dog trainers and like, they're all terrible at marketing, right? And they're all really brutal at marketing. But, would you have actually gone through that, I call it like walking over broken glass. Would you have walked through that broken glass to do dog training if you hated dog training, right? For 2 years, 5 years, 10 years before you figured it out? Probably not, I don't think, right? And so I would really, almost discourage people from, if this is your first business, it should be something that you enjoy doing, right? If it's your second or third, you know what you're getting into. It's no problem, right? But
yeah, you have to there has to be some incentive to get you through all of that, pain and hard work. You have to end up loving it at the end of the day and have it fulfill you. Okay, and what are some of your favorite resources for small business owners? Any books, podcasts, YouTube channels, or anything like that you can recommend?
Yeah, well, probably my favorite book of all time is Michael Gerber's E-Myth. Like, I think it's one of the best books. Like, someone gave it to me once, right? And it was probably the single thing that might have changed my life. Actually, that guy gave me that book that day. Yeah. So that was, I think I would start there. In terms of like resources, like, our firm puts on a boot camp every single quarter. We almost give the tickets away for $100 just to see if people are going to show up if they're serious, right? But it's one of those things for that person who's thinking about the business, right? Because surprisingly enough, there's a lot more people who want to pay us than people who are willing to do the work, right? We put that business plan together for people, but we're not entirely sure if they're going to follow it, especially when they figure out that, hey, this does take 60 plus hours a week, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're starting with a bunch of capital where you can pay other people. And I would suggest even if startup business had that capital, they don't know how to deploy it correctly. So it just allows them to make bigger mistakes usually. And so, we do that boot camp, for example, usually every 3 months. In COVID, we got a little off our schedule just because of it's an in-person event. But, we started at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And that's not because I think the most people will show up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. That's because I know if they can't show up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I can't help them anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's so true. You're not getting paid to do the work for them. They have to follow the plan that is given.
That's right. and it's like, they start these businesses, you got to have a unique idea, but we don't have to reinvent the whole wheel, right?
Yeah.
You got something a little bit special the way you do it, but you don't have to run every piece of marketing. You don't have to run your accounting data file. You don't have to do HR. If you try to come up with a unique idea in each one of those areas, the chance of success just goes down dramatically. Right? Just find the one unique thing that you do and then supplement it with proven tactics around it.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, I think those are some really great resources for small business owners. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope that this information does help a small business owner or encourages an aspiring entrepreneur to pursue their business idea. If someone were wanting to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that following this podcast?
Probably the best way is go ahead and sign up for our boot camp, right? In terms of our demand, like we usually have a wait list on for our initial consults, and so we really prioritize working with the business owners that have actually graduated from the boot camp, we call it, right?
Oh, okay.
Once they've come to that, so you can go onto our website, spurrell.ca/business-bootcamp. Even if you just type in business boot camp, if you're anywhere in Canada, it's probably going to show up on the first page of Google, and we'll teach you how to do that.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, buy a ticket there, and we'd love to see you out there. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. This episode featured Josh Spurrell, CPA, author, and founder of Spurrell & Associates Chartered Professional Accountants. If you like what you're hearing, have ideas for future episodes, or have any feedback you'd like to share, please email us at knowledgecenter@cpaalberta.ca or leave us a comment on social media.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Straight from the CPA's Mouth is produced by the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the CPA profession in Alberta. This podcast is made possible by Brian Heshey, FCPA FCA. Thanks to Brian's generous donation, the foundation created the Heshey CPA Knowledge Center, a virtual hub of resources for all Albertans. Find out more about the foundation and the Knowledge Center at cpaalberta.ca/foundation.